Hey, everybody. If you're listening to this, you are listening to the first free hour of this episode of The Shift with Doug McKenty. If you like what you're hearing, please consider subscribing to the show in order to access the full feature-length versions of the podcast, as well as have access to the members forum, where we discuss potential topics and interviews and dive deep into the overall concept of The Shift. For only $6 a month, not only do you get the full-length episodes, but also an opportunity to co-create with me, your host, Doug McKenty, the future of the show. Go to www.theshiftnow.com or patreon.com/theshift and sign up today in order to help make the shift possible. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Good morning, noon, or night, wherever and whenever you are listening to The Shift. I am your host, Doug McKenty. This is episode 44 of The Shift, recorded on July 3rd, 2020. If you want to find out more about the program, go to the www.theshiftnow.com. You can find it on YouTube or Facebook at The Shift with Doug McKenty, and I'm also on Twitter at @DMcKenty. My guest on the program today is Paul Levy, author of The Quantum Revelation, a radical synthesis of science and spirituality, as well as Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil. He has also been a practicing Tibetan Buddhist for over 30 years. After experiencing a mental breakdown in the early 1980s, Paul was able to extricate himself from the typical Western psychiatric analysis of his condition and turn to older healing traditions for guidance. Rather than interpreting his condition as a psychological disorder, he was able to understand that he was actually breaking through to a process of self-discovery, understood by many wisdom traditions as a spiritual awakening. He began to investigate the dreamlike nature of reality, deeply influenced by the works of Carl Jung, and developed an understanding that conscious perception can have a major impact on the objective material world. Paul has become a pioneer in the field of spiritual emergence and is the founder of the Awakening in the Dream community in Portland, Oregon. Paul's spiritual journey led him to write Dispelling Wetiko in 2013, utilizing the Native American concept of a type of mind virus that has infected much of the human race with a false belief that reality is comprised only of material substance, capable of objectification and subject to merely physical manipulations. This virus has resulted in a misinterpretation of reality which fails to understand the complex co-creation of the world by the energy of perception itself. It causes those afflicted to exhibit a type of hubris which blinds them from their natural abilities to consciously create the world, and instead destines those infected to continually create reality subconsciously, trapped in the cycle of trauma that allows the virus to take hold in the first place. In The Quantum Revelation, Paul explores the possibility that science has stumbled upon the medicine that can heal the disease that has gripped so many for so long. While exploring the smallest atomic particles, scientists discovered that the laws of causation shift depending on the awareness of the observer. In other words, consciousness has an effect on the process of creation. This understanding turns the world of materialistic science on its head and illuminates the possibility that consciousness in fact creates reality, not the other way around. Hope you enjoy this interview and check out more about Paul Levy at awakeninthedream.com. Thank you, Paul, for agreeing to be on the program, and thanks for helping to make the shift. Hey, Paul, thanks for joining me today. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's great being here. Thank you.
You want to just, for my audience, give a little bit of a history of yourself and then why you were so interested in quantum physics and why you wrote this book?
Sure. Well, my background, it's kind of unique in that, so I'm 63 years old right now. And when I was in my early to mid 20s, I had this life transforming spiritual awakening that was catalyzed by an intense trauma. And that's typical. Um, but I was in such deep suffering that I went really inside my mind, really, really deep, just really assuming the position of the witness and establishing that for hours and hours and hours a day because that was the only thing that made me feel better, even a little bit from the overwhelming trauma, psychological trauma that I was going through. And then after almost a couple of years of doing that, I got hit by a bolt of lightning just in my brain. It just ignited spontaneously. And the rest of my life was never the same. I was beginning to have a spiritual awakening
Mhm.
from the moment that happened. And I went into, and I was 24 at that point, and I was so unprepared for what was being shown to me. I went into such an incredibly ecstatic state, just filled with such excitement and enthusiasm. And it was like, from my friend's point of view, it was like having this radical personality change from one day to the next. And but my subjective experience was I was beginning to have the realization that we're having a collective dream. And I was beginning to wake up to that, and that we're all characters in each other's dreams, which is to say, we're not separate and we're interconnected and interdependent. And I was just so over the top, just like I was saying, filled with enthusiasm, that it got me in deep trouble. Within the day, I got myself thrown in my first mental hospital.
Mm.
The next couple of years, I had a real propensity, because I was a free agent out in the world. Um, I wasn't in a monastery or an ashram or contained. So I had a propensity to get myself thrown in mental hospitals, because what I was realizing was so overwhelming, and I hadn't integrated it, and I wasn't skillful in the way I was expressing it. And so within the day, I was hospitalized, and right away I was pathologized and diagnosed and medicated. I was told, "Oh, I'm mentally ill." I was going to have this chemical imbalance. Bipolar illness was what I was told I had, and it was called something different then. But I knew I was having a spiritual awakening from my own inner experience. It could not have been more clear to me. And but what happened with the psychiatric hospitals, it was such an unbelievable, it was like a second trauma on top of the first trauma that I was dealing with,
Mhm.
which was really an emotional trauma at the hands of a psychopathic father. I was the only child. Um, and so it almost killed me. It destroyed my entire family. So, because my family, they all bought into the psychiatrist's version of who I was. And the tragedy of it was that my parents took it to their grave. When they died, they were completely convinced that I was, this manic depressive person who was in denial of his illness. And even though they died, a number of years later, and I had started teaching and writing, they couldn't embrace, because I was actually the one who was shedding light on the dysfunction in the family and on the abuse that my father was playing out. And I couldn't believe that the way the field configured itself was to protect the abuser, to protect my
Mhm.
father. And what I began to realize was, like, wow, the same darker energy that had come through my father was now coming through psychiatry. It had like shifted channels. And so for years, and this is going to get to answer your question about quantum physics, you'll see, for years, well, not that many years, I was like really mad at myself for, wow, I really screwed up. How did I wind up getting hospitalized? I saw that as an error and as a mistake. But then I began to realize, no, that was part of the awakening. That was my descent into the underworld, because I could not believe the insanity of psychiatry and the abuse that the psychiatric community was enacting. And I can talk a lot more about that. Um, so the thing See, the nature of the experiences I began having after getting hit by that lightning bolt weren't just synchronistic experiences. They were physically impossible. Stuff was happening in my life that was physically, that just was not supposed to be happening in this reality, that could only happen in dreams. And particularly, I was getting to meet my teachers, particularly when I was in their field. It was like the third dimensional space time continuum would just torque, and these miracles would happen. And that made no sense to me at that point, and I'm sure it helped to even destabilize my fixed point of view even further.
Mhm.
And I now understand that, oh yeah, I was actually, something was being shown to me. And then fast forward, then over, so the final hospitalization was 82. I quickly took myself off medication, without any episodes because I figured out how to be fluid between the realms and, step into the more expanded realm and then navigate consensus reality and fluidly go back and forth. I didn't understand that at first. I don't think how I could have understood it. Um, but so then I began to encounter quantum physics, and the more I began to study quantum physics, and I'm not a physicist at all, the more I began to realize, wow, quantum physics, it's mapping the what I was experiencing. It's actually a way of explaining the unexplainable experiences I had. And so I began just like going down the rabbit hole of quantum physics more and more and more.
Hmm.
And, and just teaching myself. I've never taken a class in it and all that. But just as a curious person, I really wanted to understand and what in essence quantum physics was pointing at and was empirically proving, and I talk about this in my book, is that, oh yeah, this is a collective dream, that we're collectively dreaming up this universe as well as ourselves, as well as our experience of ourselves, as well as our experience of this universe each and every moment. And we're doing it in a way where we're entrancing ourselves. And I was realizing, oh my God, the revelations emerging from quantum physics are showing us this. And it's actually, I've written another book, and I have another one coming out soon about this collective sort of this mind virus that has befallen our species, and we've fallen into this madness that we're acting out all over the world. And, I'm happy to talk more about that. But what I was realizing was that quantum physics is offering us the medicine, the solution for the mind virus. And so that's, why I wrote the book. And that's what I talk about in the book. And I think it's helpful for people because it's not a technical book. There's no math. I'm just a curious person who's a layperson, but I was able, I think, to language what quantum physics is pointing at in a way that really can, I think, get across to a non-physicist.
Hmm.
Yeah,
It's as you even discuss in the book, it's really difficult to talk about because I mean, the quantum physics gets into who is the observer, who is the observed, do the observer and the observed co-create reality together, and then how can you talk about something that you're so uniquely participating inside of? So
yeah,
it
yeah,
it
yeah.
makes for a challenging. I'm sure it was challenging to write the book, actually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it was a total trip to write the book, and it was the way I was deepening my understanding of the very topic that I was writing about. And because just what you were just pointing at, so quantum physics comes along 100 or so years ago and basically empirically proved beyond the slightest shadow of a doubt that the universe that classical physicists were studying, which they thought of as being objective, and we were just observing it as passive observers,
Hmm.
quantum physics comes along and proves that that universe, that objective universe, didn't even exist. That it made no sense at all to talk about it, and that even more than that, that the act of observing the universe actually influences the universe observed. That the observer, the universe observed, and the act of observation are all one seamless process. There's no separate parts interacting. And that what I just described, where the act of observing actually influences the universe that you're observing, that's a description of a dream.
Hmm.
Because in a dream, the dream is your own reflection. It is a reflection of the mind that's observing, that's perceiving. And if you change your frame, your viewpoint, your interpretation, the dream being nothing other than a reflection of that mind that's observing, instantaneously shapeshifts and reflects back, giving you all the evidence you need to confirm your new viewpoint. And in essence, that's what quantum physics is exposing. It's literally showing that. And that's like so mind blowing. That's the rabbit hole that I went down in my book, in the sense that what that's pointing at is that the act of observation is actually creative, that
Hmm.
we are creative. We're creator beings made in the image of the creator God in a sense. And that's like an unbelievable thing, in the sense that that's pointing at that each of us have this enormous, unimaginable, untapped creative power at our disposal that we're using 24/7 all the time anyway. But because we're not conscious of it, we're using it in a way that not only isn't serving us, but we're using it in a way that's killing us. Particularly, not just individual, where maybe we're not, stepping into our highest potential, but collectively, that process is getting played out in a sense that we're destroying the life support system, the biosphere of the planet. And so in essence, we're committing collective suicide. And that's a dreaming process. That's actually a reflection of a process that's happening deep inside of the psyche. And that's what my work is about. That's the mind virus, that it's a virus of the mind that actually explicates itself through the medium of the outside world in such a way so as to synchronistically reflect the state of the psyche that's under its thrall. And so I can say a lot more about that, but yeah, I'll just pause for there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, let's go into it. I mean, this is just fascinating. This concept, then, that we are co-creators of our reality, and so we kind of then have a choice. Either we can believe and be conscious creators of the reality, or we cannot believe that we create, that we're simply observers of reality in this objective kind of way. I think in the mind virus kind of way, the materialistic classical physicists view, um, in which case we're still co-creating reality, but we're doing it subconsciously. We're not actually
Right.
participating, and this is what leads then down this road towards it's self-destructive behavior, really.
Right, right, and it's not a question of belief. It's a question of actually having realization. It's which is experiential,
Uh-huh.
and like a way to understand this is, through the imagination, and just imagine you're in a dream. Imagine you're in a night dream, okay? And what is a night dream but your own reflection? It's the mind projected itself out as the dreamscape appearing to itself. And so a dream is a projection, a reflection of the mind. And then, like I was saying a few minutes ago, if you hold a viewpoint in the dream, if you have an attitude, whatever that attitude or point of view is, the dream, being that it's nothing other than a reflection of your very viewpoint, of your very attitude, of the mind that's observing it, has no choice but to offer you all the evidence you need to confirm the seeming objective truth of your viewpoint.
Hmm.
So then you have a viewpoint, the dream then will reflect back that viewpoint. You now have all the confirmation you need that your viewpoint is that you're actually just seeing the objective, whatever, this universe.
Right.
And the more now that you have the confirmation, the proof, the evidence, the more fixed you become in that viewpoint, seeing it that way as if it's objective. And all of a sudden now, when you're seeing the dream, the universe you're in, as being objective, being a reflection of your mind, it just offers you all the evidence confirming your viewpoint that it is objective ad infinitum. And what's actually happened is, yeah, you've hypnotized yourself. You've put yourself under a spell by the creative genius of your own mind. And that's Watiko. And
Hmm.
and that's what we've all done. We're like these like creative sort of like geniuses with amnesia that are not in touch with the immense power we have to call forth and create our experience of reality. So then, like I've been saying, it gets that power gets turned against us in a way that's killing us. And but when in that dream, if you have the recognition, if you have lucidity in that moment, that wait a second, what I'm experiencing, that I'm looking in a mirror. Now, also, let me just point out that in the apocryphal texts, which are the people think, oh, those are the not true texts. No, they were considered the most sacred holy texts that were only shown to the initiates.
Hmm.
And the apocryphal text, there's a saying that Christ says, I am a mirror to those that know me. Okay. And a mirror is invisible. You can't see the mirror except through the reflections. So the point is that the dream, when you actually just have the recognition of the nature of your circumstance, that you're looking in a mirror, that it's your own energy that you're reacting to. You see, because if you don't see that, you then react to your reflections, thinking it's separate from you, and then you become conditioned. And so you actually are putting, there's no one else who's putting you under a spell. You yourself are putting yourself under a spell. So, what my work is about is shedding light on the dynamics of that process and showing that the origin of our madness is in us, that the origin of the
Sure.
evil that's playing out in the world, writ large on the world stage, is to be found inside of us. And then when you discover that, particularly when you connect with other people who are also discovering it, that's where, when you connect with, you can put, that creative power together in a way to really make a difference. And that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And this idea of Watiko, this is a Native American concept.
Yeah, so right, the Watiko idea, it's a Native American term, the Cree Indians, and they would call it like cannibal sickness, in a sense, because you actually eat the other person's soul. So it's like a vampiric virus. It's
Hmm.
a psychospiritual disease of the soul. It's a collective psychosis. It's this blindness, like the virus of the mind, but it's a type of blindness that actually thinks that it's sighted, and it thinks it's more sighted than the people who actually have sight. And it works through the
Right.
projective tendencies of the mind in such a way that you unwittingly, become an instrument to act it out in such a way that you're oblivious. You don't even know that you're doing that. And now the thing about Watiko being this blindness, there are four aspects of the blindness. So on the one hand, you're blind to your blindness. You don't know you're blind. You don't even know there's anything called Watiko, because it just seems your normal state. And so it's acting itself out through you. You're identifying with it. You don't see there's any problem at all. The only problem you see is with others.
It's
And
like
so you,
being in
uh-huh.
denial, huh?
Yeah, yeah, it's like being in denial and being in denial that you're in denial. It
Right.
becomes an infinite regress, a feedback loop in which you've tricked yourself out of your mind. That's
Hmm.
the blindness. That's blindness number one. Blindness number two, that Watiko inspires, is that you don't see your own shadow, your own darkness, both the personal shadow and the archetypal shadow. Blindness number three is, well, you don't see your light. You don't recognize your nature. And
Hmm.
blindness number four is, what is a quantum phenomena. So it's the source of the greatest evil. And it also encoded in it, in a superposition of states, it's like the most incredible medicine. It's a blessing. If Watiko didn't exist, we would need to invent it, because it's helping us to wake up and to evolve. So Watiko is showing us something. So we don't actually recognize that Watiko is like this revelation. It's like showing us something that's incredibly important for us to know. And so, right there are the four blindnesses. So it's not just an ordinary form of blindness, and it's a contagion. It's a mind virus. Like the coronavirus is a lower level physical emanation of the higher dimensional of Watiko mind virus.
Right.
And yeah. So anyway, so that's
Well, and it's interesting, and we can talk about this since you brought it up, because I'm feeling like this by applying the the mind virus to the coronavirus. I feel like we're all it's almost like a power trip. It's a power trip for the people who are enthralled by it, and they think that they're justified in imposing their beliefs on everybody else because they're so convinced this classical science, which, as you're describing, is actually a blindness, because they've created this very fixed reality, and then they say, well, science has proven this, so I'm right, so everybody has to do what I tell them, or else they're just wrong. You know what I mean?
right. Well,
It,
but even take it the next step, because you're talking about, how to deal with the virus, whether to wear masks or whether, whatever.
Right.
And that's a whole interesting contemplation,
Hmm.
and I'm no expert in any of that. I just, study the stuff and all that. I'm not a scientist, but
Sure.
what you pointed at is, even to me, what's even more interesting is that phenomena where somebody will have a particular point of view and they'll be convinced that their point of view is true. And then no matter, what you offer to them about evidence or facts that maybe it's not true, they'll discount that because they become, really entrenched in their viewpoint.
Right.
And that's really interesting, because Watiko, think about it like it's a bug in the system that feeds off of fear and polarization. So, and we are living in a body politic now. There's extreme polarization and there's incredible fear that's being inculcated through the mainstream media all over the place.
Hmm.
And so, when there's fear, polarization, and then feeling this separation, when we identify with that who we are as a separate self, which immediately makes somebody else there an other. And as soon as there's an other, there's fear. So it just, and that circumstance, that's like the petri dish that the Watiko virus will just propagate itself. And that's the contagious
Right.
aspect of it, you know?
Yeah, it's crazy, and it gives. I'm reminded of Nietzsche's concept of the will to power here, where it's the science, the classical science, is used to justify this imposing your will upon others, or rather than just respecting different points of view. It's. I mean, again, we're getting into territory where it's challenging to talk about, just like quantum mechanics is challenging to talk about, but. I think there's something to this mind virus where materialism and classical physics is just often used as a kind of an excuse. I mean, there are scientists that say, "Hey, wearing masks protects you 100%." There are other scientists who say, "No, masks don't protect you at all." And there's just a difference of opinion here. But
Right,
people will choose a side and say my side is right because the scientific
right,
consensus says this or whatever. But it's like, no,
right,
actually nobody really knows whether or how much a mask helps you or not. It's just it's an opinion, it's an idea, but classical physics is used to kind of justify this power trip. I guess it's just so strange.
Well,
People are
it
using
can
it
be,
a
yeah,
lot these days.
and I'm just aware of what I've learned by being in the position I'm in, of being an author and a teacher and a healer and stuff like that, is, yeah, there are certain things that I really have expertise in, like, like this mind virus. I really know that because of what I went through with my father, with my family, how my family protected, my
Mm,
father with psychiatry, and in my own mind. Because the thing about Watiko, you see, if I can just go back, Watiko. So what I've learned is to not really talk about stuff that I'm not expert in, and I just
sure.
don't have. I would have to spend 24 hours a day doing research on this and that about, and I just know I have my own work that's taking up my life, and so yeah, there are plenty of stuff I don't really know what's true, and I openly profess, yeah, I don't know, I'm not an expert in that, but I am, I have an expertise in certain things. Now, here's the thing which is interesting about Watiko. You see, it's an inner disease. It's a psycho-spiritual disease of the psyche. So it's an inner disease, and like I was saying, that actually expresses itself through the medium of the outside world. But here's how it works. So, say if you see somebody who at a certain moment is playing out Watiko, so they look like, wow, they're taken over. They even seem like they're embodying Watiko, or they're like the incarnation of the bug in human form. And it's easy just in with our righteousness to think, oh, they're the ones with the disease, and
Hmm.
me and my innocence, I'm not. Well, if you assume that viewpoint, then that's an expression that you're under the thrall of the bug, because you've polarized. The idea being
Right.
that when you see, in the same way that it's impossible to see the unconscious being acted out by somebody, or by in your family or at work or in the world, without having your unconscious activated. The unconscious is non-local. then the point you have to first metabolize what's gotten triggered in you and integrate it before you can actually intervene in that unconscious situation in a way that's helpful. In the same way, when you see somebody playing out Watiko, you know, you have to recognize that, oh, they're a reflection. They're a dream character. I'm looking in a mirror right now, and they're a reflection of some sort of this resonant Watiko part in me.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm seeing them as being evil, and then I'm all self-righteously trying to destroy the evil, no, then like I say, that's to be under the spell of the bug. But if you have the recognition that, wow, when I see Watiko, I get triggered. And what about if I attend
Right.
to what in me? You see, because the thing about Watiko, it's so elusive because it's an inner disease of the soul that operates and configures events in the outer world so as to reflect itself. And then once we see it, then we get triggered. And if we put our attention outside of ourselves, then we've distracted ourselves from the actual source of the virus, which is inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's why in my work, I'm continually emphasizing to self reflect and to really understand that what you're seeing out there in the world, that if this is a dream, there is no out there, that the act of observing the world is actually influencing the world. There's no separation. You see, in a quantum universe, there's no separate parts interacting. And quantum physics has shown this universe is quantum on all scales. It's
Mm-hmm.
quantum through and through. Like quantum physics started as trying to understand the microstructure of the universe. What is the building blocks of this universe? And when it found the most elementary particle, and then it went beyond that, it just dissolved, and the only thing left, there was nothing there but consciousness, but the mind. And this isn't what physicists signed up for. But
Right.
all of a sudden, consciousness had intruded into the physics lab and it wasn't going away and it was demanding to be factored into the equation of reality, you know? And yeah.
Well, you talk about, why don't we explain the two slit experiment, because that was sort of where when physicists started to realize, wait a minute, we can't really tell the difference between a particle or a wave or what we're observing here and what's going on, and then
Yeah,
quantum
yeah,
physics
yeah.
kind of grows from that.
Yeah, and I have a chapter in my book and that about the two slit experiment. And that's really, encoded in that experiment is the whole mystery of quantum physics.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the experiment that really in which consciousness intruded into the physics lab and that opened up the whole, the door to the mystery, and in essence what they discovered. So think about, here they had like a photon, which is the really the building, like, here there's light is made of photons, and sometimes depending on how they observed, light would manifest as a particle, and other times it would manifest as this wave. Now, wave and particles, you can't imagine more opposite things. They're mutually exclusive. They're complete contradictions,
Mm-hmm.
and they so and I'm not going to go into the specifics, but they set up. They noticed that when the photons, they shot these photons through one at a time through these slits, and they saw the different type of pattern it made on the film. And when they put like a camera that was watching what state the photon was in when it went through the slit, it actually changed the way the photon manifested. It was as if the photon knew it was being observed. It was as if the photon had a consciousness and was aware that it was being watched, and it would change the way it behaved based on if there was somebody observing it or not, which blew everything out of the water. So that was really the experiment, like I was saying, where consciousness sort of, stepped into the physics lab, and that opened up, I mean, just such a huge thing, because then in quantum physics there's something called well, for example, is light a wave or is it a particle? and they realize, well, it's kind of both, and it's like
Hmm.
sometimes it manifests as a wave, sometimes it's a particle. They're like these complementary aspects that are mutually contradictory and exclusive, and you need both to describe the total nature. And this is related to, in the West, we have this this two valued, like this logic where you could think of things are either true or false. Well, is something true or is it false? It has to be one or the other. Well, in Tibetan Buddhism, they have what's called the logic of four values. And this is quantum logic because it's the same logic in Buddhism, as in quantum physics, as in a dream. And instead of it being A or B, it's A and B, that they're both true and false, simultaneous. And it's a higher form of logic that really expands the mind. And I talk about this in my book. And so, what this is really pointing at is this universe, like I was saying before, is a collective dream. And so, if I could just say something about, you see, because quantum physics expands the realm of the possible to unimaginable degrees. So, if I can just go into this, because this feels really important
Sure.
and
Yeah.
it's really inspiring. So, one of the dangers, things right now in our world are really difficult. There is incredible darkness that's playing out, and a lot of people are filled with despair and depression and pessimism, you know. And from the quantum point of view, if you're holding a viewpoint, you see the thing about Watiko, it feeds off of over pessimism, but it also feeds off of over optimism. Like a lot of new age spiritual people are like, oh, God's in charge and everything's great. Yeah,
Right.
Watiko's having a field day on that, because that's not in touch with reality. Because our situation is dire. We're approaching an event horizon,
Hmm.
and where we're destroying the biosphere. And once you cross that Rubicon, there's no going back. And but Watiko also feeds off of over pessimism. And for example, if this is a dream, if you're holding a pessimistic point of view, you're going to like attract evidence confirming your pessimism. And there's an overabundance of that.
Yeah.
And then once you draw to yourself that pessimism, that confirmation bias in a way, then you become more entrenched in a pessimistic point of view. And the more you see the world through that pessimistic filter, the more the world gives you evidence confirming it. It's a self generating feedback loop whose origin is your own mind. And then you're actually part of the problem. You're not part of the solution.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then here comes quantum physics. Now, if I can just describe, a real fundamental part of quantum physics, for example, you have a quantum entity, right? Now, a quantum entity, an elementary particle, it exists in every and any state it possibly could exist in that you ever could imagine, in potential, up until the moment of an observer. An observer comes along, and once they observe that quantum entity, it actualizes into a particular form, and all of the other possibilities just disappear as if they never existed or as if they go into a parallel universe.
Hmm.
And now, what that means is that, and this isn't me, I'm quoting, this is some of the founding fathers of quantum physics. They would say, even if one of those possibilities is incredibly, ridiculously unlikely, it could still manifest this very next moment. Okay. And what that means in actual ordinary life is that if there are a sufficient number of people, think about like the 100th monkey phenomena, or in the
Yeah.
Bible, they talk about the 144,000, the symbolic number. If there is a critical mass of people who actually wake up or own their shadow or recognize the dreamlike nature or however you would say it, that actually could catalyze a global awakening in our species. And that quantum physics would say that's within the realm of the possible. And if you're not imagining that, then what are you thinking? You know? And like here's a beautiful image of how that works. If you take sugar, grains of sugar, and dissolve them into a glass of water, each grain just dissolves and dissolves. And then when it reaches the saturation point, you add one more grain of sugar, and as if by magic, a crystal will materialize, right? And any one of us in this moment might be that grain of sugar. If we're having like understanding right now, if we're seeing the dreamlike nature, if we're connecting with our true nature at this moment, any one of us could be that grain of sugar that non locally will catalyze a global awakening in the collective unconscious
Hmm.
of our species. And that's not new age magical thinking. I mean, that's what this is all about. And yeah, can I even say something more about that? Because that this is so profound.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. One way to understand this is through the imagination. So
Hmm.
imagine you're in a dream, right? And you actually have the recognition that you're dreaming. And so you have the lucid, you have this lucid dream. And imagine then other of your dream characters who are none other than just aspects of yourself, because that's what a dream character is. So just imagine if one or 10 or 100 of your other dream characters in that dream, just imagine they also have lucidity.
Hmm.
And then imagine if you all come together and hang out and you contemplate what you're discovering. Wow, we're all realizing this is a collective dream, that this universe we're hanging out in is a dream universe that we, moment by moment, are dreaming up into materialization together. But we've been conditioned to dream it up in this limited way that seems really problematic and that is killing us. So that's where I imagine, wait a second, what about if we actually put that the sacred power of our dreaming, that's what I call it, the power of us that is literally dreaming this dream into materialization each and every moment. What if we get in phase with each other and we support each other and we activate the collective genius where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts? What if we dream ourselves awake and deepen our lucidity in such a way that we can literally change the dream we're having? And I'm describing a night dream. Well, that's what's available to us in the waking dream. And that's evolutionary.
Hmm.
And one way of understanding that is that we're invited to participate in our own evolution. That's what this is all about. And we either have the recognition of what's being revealed to us, or if we don't have the recognition, then we're fated, we're doomed to continue to destroy ourselves.
You mentioned a little bit in the book, and I've done a couple of interviews about this now. So just recently, and considering what's going on right now, I mean, this is it's just is on my mind, which is that this kind of this technocratic scientism seems to be popular, I guess, or I don't know. I mean, I guess if you just want to just kind of discuss it, is there a group of people who are, so I guess sometimes I wonder if there aren't people who understand this who then sort of teach or impose this materialism on the rest of us, or they don't want us to understand um, our quantum potential or grasp this power because it's individuating if we
Yeah.
understand this. Whereas if we stay in that materialistic mindset, I think it's very easy for us to be controlled and not be empowered to kind of break out of the mold, if you will.
Yeah. And that's an interesting, contemplation. Like, are there actually individual people who are really switched on to this like higher science of mind and are,
Right.
insidiously like manipulating and controlling?
Yeah.
And who knows? I mean, I'm of the opinion, okay, I'll say it this way. on the one hand, I feel like that um, the source of this process, of this collective dream, is in the archetypal realm, which is a higher dimensional realm. Which is to say, if we get so, and that's not to, that doesn't preclude that there are actually sinister, power hungry people who are like,
Hmm.
kind of trying to centralize power and control and enslave all of us. I'm not saying that that's not a possibility, that there aren't actual people playing those roles.
Right.
What I am saying, if you take those people and put them in jail, that over time, just new people will pick up those roles, because there's the deeper archetype that's
Sure.
like informing, the deeper process. And what that means is that the source of that process is then within our minds, is within consciousness. And and so any one of us, because the way to change the world is through the individual. It's not just like, oh, let's just put this new law or legislation. No, the idea being that when any of us really connects with our nature, that realization instantaneously, in no time, faster than the speed of light, faster than we can think or blink,
Hmm.
gets registered throughout the entire universe, making it that much more probable that all of us can then access that and incarnate that realization.
Right.
And so you see, because the thing about what I'm trying to do, there's such an edge, particularly in New Age spiritual circles, about just even talking about, saying the word evil. And I'm saying,
Right.
that's a huge mistake. I mean, I understand there's a real charge. It reminds me of, I had this dream once where I was lucid in my dream, and I went up to a dream character and I said, "Hey, this is a dream." And of course, I wasn't fully lucid, or I wouldn't be wasting my time trying to wake up one of my dream characters. But I had a degree of lucidity, and I was saying, "Hey, this is a dream." And he says to me, he goes, "That word is so charged, dream. Could you use a different word?" And I'm thinking, wow, now that's really interesting. Like, how do I deal with that? And it's similar with evil, because evil, people are saying, "Oh, well, theologically, it's not real." I'm not a theologian. I'm not qualified, but psychologically, it's as real as we are.
Yeah.
And we need to come to terms with that, with evil. And light, I point out, has no benefit whatsoever unless it illumines darkness. And
Right.
so what I'm trying to point out, because Watiko is the source of all of the evil, both individually, interpersonally, relationships, and collectively, that we're acting out. It's the source of that evil, and it's also its own medicine. And something is being shown to us through the darkness. And if we turn away, because one of the ways Watiko feeds is by turning a blind eye, is, oh, I don't want to deal with evil. So if I can just say one thing about this, for example, you know, um, people who don't want to put their attention on evil, or, oh, I don't want to, even think about it, by being in avoidance, they're avoiding relationship with
Right.
something in themselves, and they're unwittingly feeding and making stronger the very evil they're turning away from. But if they become overly focused with it and fascinated with evil, then they're also unwittingly feeding it. But the point is, what I point out, when you see it, when you see how it works, and you actually see how it works out in the world through the non local field, how it disguises itself, and how it works via your unconscious reactions and your blind spots in your mind. And then you see it and you realize, oh, now I see you. But being a sovereign being, I can choose where I place my attention. And I want to place my attention on creating the world I want to live in,
Hmm.
that's in alignment with who I'm discovering myself to be, which is interconnected with the whole universe. That point of view takes away the food for Watiko and actually empowers us. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I've heard this term, it's coming up quite a bit for me lately, actually, called spiritual bypassing, where people just, it's like exactly what you're describing. They want to avoid anything negative, and then they they end up just sort of living in a fantasy world, and they're not taking responsibility for maybe some negative things they've done in the past, or they're just simply not acknowledging the negativity that actually exists in the world, so they're not confronting it or dealing with it, or transforming or transmuting it into a more healthy energy. It's just another form of avoidance. It's not getting the
Totally.
job done.
Yeah, 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 and that's related, exactly, that's related to the idea we all have, like, we're a species in trauma. We have collective PTSD. We all have
Right.
this wound. I mean, and if you remember the wound, I was so wounded, and I'm still in touch with my how, like, I feel so broken and traumatized and wounded, but I don't identify with it. I carry it. It almost becomes a portal to my gifts, to my creativity, and so the idea of the wound, if we are continually avoiding it, that's the spiritual bypassing. But
Hmm.
the idea of, if we have the courage, to really go through the wound and to experience the wound, and that becomes the portal to our deepest gifts. Because you see, one of the things, and that's related to the wounded healer. That's the archetype of the wounded healer, and that's related to the archetype of I'm actually having so many, like, things. I'm writing down stuff so I don't forget to share with
Cool.
you.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But the wounded healer, that's related to. I wrote an article right before the pandemic happened about the shaman, and the shaman, the shamanic archetype. That's one of the major archetypes that's activated in the field, in the non-local field throughout the
Hmm.
world. And what I mean by that is that, so think about a shaman. A shaman, it's not like anybody would consciously choose to be a shaman. If you do, you're out of your mind. You have no
Right. Yeah.
idea of the suffering that it involves. And but like the shamanic archetype, it's something that you're called. That, in other words, the spirits call you, or some sort of, whatever higher energy calls you. And the point is that if you don't assent to the calling, if you say, no, 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 I can't do that, I want to do something else, that's when the shaman can get really sick and can
Sure.
even die. But then once you ascend, all of a sudden, that's all the archetype needs, because the same source of the calling, that's the source of that sponsors your whole process. Then it'll send you everything you need, the clients, the students, the patients, the books, the whatever it is. But you have to get into alignment and really agree and assent to the calling. And the shaman typically makes a descent into the underworld, the place of madness, and of darkness, of evil, and of death. And it's a very dangerous place because you can get stuck in any of those. But if you're able to come through, in the typical image is like, and then the shaman, re-emerges into the world with gifts that they've received from, that from going on that journey. And but here's the part of the shamanic process, of the shamanic trip, that I wrote about, that I found most interesting. Now, remember, a shaman is related to the wounded healer. A shaman is very empathic. Their boundaries, they have permeable boundaries between themselves and the world, between the conscious and the unconscious. And so, say, for example, a shaman, if they're working with a client and the client has a sickness, what will happen? The shaman will take on the sickness, and taking on has a double meaning. It means, to have it out with the sickness. They'll confront the sickness, but it also means to take it within themselves. And what that means is that they become sick. They will literally fall sick. Now they're experiencing the sickness from the inside. They're not just objectively observing it. No, now they're getting inside information. It's an inside job. They're experiencing what that sickness feels like by having it. But if they're an accomplished shaman, they're able over time to connect with their wholeness, to connect with themselves, and to connect with their true nature, to the self, to their light. And by doing that, they're more and more slowly, slowly, they're metabolizing and assimilating that sickness until they bring themselves back to wholeness, to themselves, to health.
Hmm.
And them doing that non-locally affects the patient such that it makes it way more probable then that the patient will be able to find their way back to health. Now, that's the image. And what I'm pointing at when I say that the shamanic archetype is the archetype that's activated in our collective dream right now is that we have all been sickened by there's a collective sickness. That's Watiko.
Hmm.
Watiko is a collective psychosis. It pervades, it's in the collective unconscious. We've all been made sick. And so one of the dangers is because we all have been kind of thrown off balance and kind of feel like we're going kind of crazy and all that. The danger is to personalize that. But once we recognize, wait a second, maybe what I'm feeling, maybe I'm actually an iteration of the greater fractal of the universe. And me as an individual, as a microcosm, have actually am actually experiencing the very circumstance, the very sickness, the very shadow and darkness and madness that's in the collective. And that if I actually can metabolize that in myself and bring myself back to me, to who I actually am, to my true
Hmm.
nature, then I'm being, in a sense, an antipsychotic agent for the field. Okay, and that's when we actually have put on our shamanic sort of garment and have stepped into our shamanic identity, and so that's really I think that's really like our this role that we're being asked. Are we going to have courage enough to sort of actively participate in that process? And the one thing about that, the shaman is really a storyteller. They're like a dreamer, a mythologist, because they're living a mythic realm, and they're the creative artist. That's who they are. So, see, encoded in the disease, in Watiko, in the collective madness, however it's iterating itself through each one of us, is our creative power. Okay, because if you remember, I'm talking quantum physics. Quantum
Hmm.
physics is reflecting that all of us have this enormous creative power. And so, to the extent, like people ask me, "Oh, how am I getting along in the pandemic?" And I'm really thankful because I know so many people who are just indulging in their addictions or habitual patterns, or
Sure.
whatever they're doing in that way, which is not really serving. And I've been saying to people, yeah, there's like enormous energy that's available in the field, and I've been able to plug into it to even, because I'm a typically very creative person, but to even more amplify my creativity, and to the extent that we're able to creatively express ourselves, um, that because the greatest poison in the human psyche is unexpressed creativity. So to the extent that any of us are able to really plug in and channel and express the creative spirit within us, that's the greatest medicine for us, and it's the greatest offering that we can make for the rest of the universe.
Right, like we're born and we have some kind of a function or something that we want to bring into this dimension. And if we can't create that, then we're going to be unhappy. And that's the source, basically, the source of all disease, actually, probably at the end of the day, at least from one perspective.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, even in the apocryphal texts,
Hmm.
Christ says, if you bring forth what's within you, it will save you. If you don't bring forth what's within you, it will destroy you. It's exactly that idea, you know. And and then if I could just go into the underlying process of Watiko, and I keep on talking about the origin is in the psyche. So the psychological dynamic, I think, is really important to understand, and it's so obvious and it's so easy, I think, to understand. And it has to do with we all have a shadow, right? And to the extent that I'm not doing shadow work and I'm not owning my shadow, well, what do? I project it out. So I
Right.
project out the shadow, and that projection of the shadow, that's the source of Watiko. And here's how it works. So, and yeah, and keep in mind that there's a golden shadow, oh, the enlightened part of me that I'm happy to project out onto that guru or that swami or whatever.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I'm talking about really just the real rejected, despised, darker shadow, just to make it really easy to understand. Um, so, so say for example, we're all an amount like a combination of like light and dark. And but if I'm not intimate and owning and courageous enough to take a look at my own shadow, well, then, like I'm saying, I project it out. I dissociate from that darkness. I split off from the darkness.
Hmm.
So then I've split, and split is an interesting word. It means to dissociate, and it means I'm going to leave. So it means two things: to leave and to dissociate. So we're not looking at our darkness, we split, we dissociate, we project out our shadow. Now, a way to understand this is go, and that's an internal process that takes place in our minds. But the way to understand this, go to a dream. In a dream, if you project out your darker half, and what is the dream? The dream is a reflection of the inner process of your psyche. So then into the dream, guaranteed, will come in somebody or a group of people who will be carriers of your own darkness, of your own evil, of your own shadow. And if you don't have the recognition that you're dreaming and that you're just looking at your own reflection, you're then now you have all the evidence that the evil and the darkness and the shadow really is outside of yourself. So you're going to feel identified in a one-sided way with being just light. Well, the evil's out there. So then you get more entrenched in that position of seeing the evil outside of yourself. And the more you see the evil outside of yourself, the more the dream is going to supply all the evidence you need of that darkness. And then what happens at a certain point, you try to destroy that darkness because it's reminding you of something you don't want to look at it yourself. And trying to destroy the darkness is just a reiteration. It's this like dramatization in the external through the external medium of the dream of the initial inner process of
Hmm.
wanting to get rid of and exterminate and destroy your own darkness. Now your own inner process is playing out. If you remember Watiko, it's an inner process that plays itself out externally in the world. There it is. Your inner process of wanting to destroy your own darkness is now going to get played out as you try to destroy the carrier of your own evil. But by doing that, guess what? You then become possessed by the very evil that you're trying to destroy out there. And by
Right.
doing that, that's complete madness.
The
And that's Watiko. And so I'm trying to trace and point out that's the way it works within the psyche. And then when the other person is doing the same thing to us, then you get worse. Then you get like the circumstance that we are seeing in the world today.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is the old cycle of violence, and how challenging it is to actually wake up to it and then be able to break it and replace it with something that is healthy and nourishing. It's a real challenge. The habit patterns are so subconscious. Um, it's difficult to heal from this mind virus to really look
But
at it from a long term.
hold on one second. You're totally right when you say that. But just to be playful and to play devil's advocate, I would say, oh, be careful of casting a spell on yourself.
Right.
Because by our language, for example, if I say, oh yeah, this mind virus is really hard to heal, well, guess what? Out of the infinite universes, I'm invoking the universe that's going to give me that confirmation bias, that's going to give me all
Sure.
the evidence that the mind virus is going to be hard to heal. Because think about it, how do you make a word? We spell it, right? So by our words, we're casting spells moment by
Hmm.
moment. That's the power of the word. We have enormous power in the way that we language our experience. And you see, here's the thing about awakening that I'm more and more understanding, and I'm a work in progress. I'm not in any way saying, "Oh, I'm this awake." I just had an interview a couple days ago, and the person started the interview by describing me as an enlightened being,
Oh yeah.
and then said, "Oh, and how do you feel about being described that way?" And I was just like, you got to be. And I said, oh, that's completely not true. I mean, I am just an ordinary person. I mean,
Right.
so completely, and I have teachers. I mean, they're really, I feel, enlightened beings, not me. But more and more, I'm learning that it's not a question that we have to do something, to access our nature, to awaken. In a sense, we've gotten in the chronic habitual pattern of contracting against our light, and it
Hmm.
becomes so chronic that it's become unconscious. And so then it's really just a sense of gaining insight into that process. So we don't even have to do anything. We just have to stop doing something. We just have to stop that self contraction and let our light shine. And that's our true nature. That is, that's effortless. It's like we don't have to. It's just who we are. You know, and that's why when you connect with a real teacher, like with my teachers, when I bring them here, people just want to hang out with them and be near them because that's contagious. When you're around somebody who's just so at ease and so just
Hmm.
letting their light shine, it really, there's a part of us that recognizes that and that becomes activated in that same frequency. And that's the power
Sure.
of sangha in Buddhism. They talk about the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the teacher teaching in the community. And
Mm.
that's the idea of sangha, that there's real, it's profound when you hang out with other people who are also awakening. And my most favorite definition of bodhisattva is a being in the process of awakening. And who among us is not that? We're all awakening. And when you hang out with each other in a way where it's not a competitive sport, who's more awake, you or me, but if I help you awaken, it helps me because we're not separate. Because the way the medicine for Watiko, you see, there are three ways of healing Watiko, and it's all the same. It's interconnected facets of a jewel. And the first is to see through the separate self, to see through that's the illusion that we exist as a separate self. The second is to see the non local field. And that's the physics term that this universe is a quantum universe. There's no separate parts. It's seamlessly interconnected with itself everywhere through space and time. And we're contained in the field and we're expressions of the field and we're not separate from the field.
Hmm.
So to see through the separate self, to see the non-local field, and to see the dream, and to recognize, oh, we're having a dream. That moment, but even you and I right now, everything I'm saying, you're dreaming me up to say
Right.
what I'm saying, but I'm dreaming you up to dream me up. You see, it's not a linear causal thing; it's an acausal, synchronistic, cybernetic feedback loop that is happening all the time, but it's just really fun when you hang out with people who we can do it kind of consciously.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. But anyway, Paul, looks
Yeah.
like, yeah, it looks like we're getting towards a little over an hour and a half now. So winding it down feels like it might be, we've covered a lot of ground here. Is there
Yeah,
anything else
totally.
that you're feeling like expressing right
No,
now?
no, no. I just really appreciate the invitation, and
Okay.
yeah, I enjoyed this. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for coming on the show. It was a great, the quantum mechanics thing was a place that I hadn't really gone, and I had a sense that it was going to be really interesting for me. So thanks for writing the book, and thanks for having the conversation, because it
For
opened
sure.
my
Totally.
mind to a different aspect, and different ways of thinking about putting this whole big puzzle of life together and trying to make some sense out of what's going on here.
Totally. Totally. Great. Well, thank you so much. Yeah.
Do you want to tell people where to get in touch? Maybe how to get a copy of the book?
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, the best way is to go to my website, awakeninthedream.com, www.awakeninthedream.com. And yeah, there's just, a ton of articles, all for free, and interviews. People tell me, oh, I should monetize the site, and I don't want to at all. I mean, the
Hmm.
only, people can, if you want to talk to me, you can book a session, or, I sell my books. It's obvious where to buy my books. And also you can go to Amazon, to get my books there. Um, and yeah, that's really it. I just want to get this information out, because it's really, really helping people.
Hmm.
And so that's really the main thing is to go to my website. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And you want to give my audience a hint about what the new book's going to be about?
Oh yeah, the new book is Dispelling Watiko for Good, which is the companion volume to Dispelling Watiko, which is the book about the Watiko virus.
Hmm.
And there's a huge chapter on quantum physics, um, and that one's basically already written. I'm in the process of trying to find a publisher. So if anybody out there has any insights into publishers, let me know. And yeah, because and what the new book is, it's really pointing out that every spiritual tradition in the history of this planet, and so many creative artists and thinkers and philosophers, they're all pointing at Watiko, just in different names. And you know, and so that's really what the book is about. Is really trying to show that it's not just a Native American tradition, or it's not just me.
Hmm.
It's like, no, no, no. This is every single wisdom tradition and thinkers
Right.
and philosophers, like I'm saying, and artists, creative writers, and they're all pointing at exactly, the Watiko spirit. And it can be really helpful when you really put all of those articulations together to help us to see it. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for your work, Paul. I think that putting together, where modern physics is going with quantum mechanics, but also, and then bringing it back into these wisdom traditions, and especially this concept of the mind virus and the Watiko is really important to me. It helps me to be able to put in perspective maybe why things are the way that there are, and give some observations as to how to get out of it. That we're kind of trapped into a mode of perception, but it really doesn't have to be this way. And we can be, we can engage in a different form of, a relational observation that opens up a whole new world for us that really is much more self-empowering. I mean, I remember even as a kid growing up in that rational world, and just maybe even to full circle back to some of that trauma that kind of helped to wake you up, was just feeling like if we live in this world and it's just 100% rational, then are we just trapped in this predetermined, predestined, situation that we can't change? And ideas like quantum mechanics, that's the mind virus, right? And ideas like quantum mechanics say, no, you have free will. We can get out of this.
Totally. Totally.
So yeah, thanks again for your work. And I'll just let people know that you have been listening to The Shift. I've been your host. My name is Doug McKenty. You can check out my stuff at www.theshiftnow.com. You can think about, if you haven't already, subscribing, becoming a member, participating in the membership forum, so we can keep good conversations like this one going whenever you feel like getting involved. And you can also check me out on Facebook at The Shift with Doug McKenty, and on Twitter at @DMcKenty. So hope you think about getting more involved. And again, thank you so much, Paul, for being on the show. And thanks a lot for your work.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
Well, all right. Hey, everybody. That was one of the most far out conversations I've had in a long time. I really kind of enjoyed myself. And when you really start getting into those kinds of discussions where you're getting down to the very nature of consciousness and perception itself, it almost started to feel like Paul and I were co-creating our own reality in the moment there, which I guess, we always are. We all always are all the time. But it was almost kind of magnified in that conversation. And it really kind of gave me a sense that, it's just great that the science is coming around. The Western science is coming around to this notion that conscious energy, energetic perception really does transform the reality around you. And this is in line, of course, with all the other great cultural traditions of the world. It just seems like people that have been colonized into this Western civilization over the last few thousand years have forgotten a lot of these central tenets. You see it in Buddhism, you see it in Taoism and Hinduism, and all of the indigenous traditions around the world, where so many cultures have recognized this simple truth over the millennia of human existence. But those that have been colonized in this Roman tradition for the last few thousand years seem to have forgotten that. That's what, of course, Paul describes as the Wetiko, which was a Native American concept, actually, of the mind virus that's kind of trapping all of us into this purely materialistic perception. I really had some tripped out thoughts. Paul even mentioned there at one point how words can cast a spell. And as I was reading his book, I was thinking about how the concept of the empire and then the concept of empirical, and how those two words have the same root, empire. And it's just interesting that this belief that objectifying and studying is also connected linguistically to the concept of empire, which is, controlling large vasts of humanity and large swaths of the earth's resources under a hierarchical or patriarchal system. So how interesting that we see that these hierarchical systems, these systems based on control and dominance, are also connected to this consciousness of empiricism, or objectification of the way that we view or the reality around us, rather than recognizing a subjective experience where we consciously co-create with all of the other, within the field of consciousness all around us, like Paul is describing in the quantum revelation. So some really interesting stuff, and really fun to be able to dive super deep into all of that with him. I hope that you got as much out of it as I did, and I certainly recommend checking out the book and spend some time thinking about this concept of Wetiko. I mean, not only is it interesting to think about empiricism or materialism as a kind of a mind virus, I do think that it projects a lot of arrogance, or a lot of arrogance gets projected by those that really hold fast to this materialism. I keep bringing this up at that idea of scientism. I mean, we're seeing it more and more, even as this whole COVID thing progresses further and further, where people are saying, well, science is saying this, and so this must be true, and we all have to act this way. And it really is just a power trip. It's just a methodology of control, a use of this quote unquote empiricism to prove that we all have to act like this, or else the empire will come and get you, right? Without any, validation for those that may disagree. Well, hey, I don't think COVID is that dangerous. Maybe I'm not feeling like wearing a mask. I don't think that's protecting me. But not validating that other people feel differently than those who know the truth about science. The great irony, of course, is that these materialistic scientismists don't understand that science has now, through quantum mechanics, shown that in fact it's your consciousness that changes the way the experiments work out. So, maybe if you're looking to prove that masks work, that's what you're going to find. It gets complicated, right? Which I think is why you got to take a step back, and you got to give each individual the right to choose. You've got to validate each person's individual feelings. They can act how they want as long as they're not infringing on your boundaries. Then, hey, let's all just make choices for ourselves about how we want to protect ourselves in this world from the variety of different challenges that we're all going to face in our lives, right? Anyway, another good conversation to think about. Hope you do have a lot to think about, and I really hope you check out the book. Remember, you can find out more about Paul and his work at awakeninthedream.com. And of course, you can check out more about The Shift at www.theshiftnow.com, or check me out on Facebook or YouTube at The Shift with Doug McKenty, and of course on Twitter at DMcKenty. So again, I will see you on the flip side. Got another interview coming up next week. Hope you keep checking it out. And if you're listening to this on one of the many free sites that I'm going to have this posted up, on, then think about becoming a subscriber. It's only $6 a month. Go to www.theshiftnow.com and click on that subscribe button, or you can check me out at Patreon at patreon.com/theshift, and you can throw me a bone for the work that I'm doing here, and have access to the members forum, a little bit more direct access to what's going on behind the scenes. So thanks again for listening, and looking forward to catching you on the next one. Take care.